All right, looks like we are live. Welcome everybody. My name's Scott Maier. This is Drawing Together with Artist Network. Very excited to be here today with you. We meet every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern to draw together. So if you're new, the whole objective for the show is for us to get together and draw. Today I've chosen this subject of this cheetah below me, and if you want to follow along, you can pull up a kind of the full version of the reference in the description below. So you'll find that link there, the list of materials as well. So I'm going to go over those. You'll also find in the description the link to the show page on Artist Network where you can share your work when you're done. So that's also pinned at the top of the chat. Welcome everybody. I love seeing all these familiar names. We are coming up on nearly 100 episodes already, so this is really wild. So thank you all for making this so awesome. Okay, so today, drawing this cheetah, this was a lot of fun. And so hopefully we can have as much fun as I did drawing this preparatory drawing today. Okay, let's dig into it. I'll go over the materials really quickly. This is some Rives BFK paper. So Legion paper sent me out some of this. I love that. I've talked about this paper before. I really enjoy it. So this is 100% cotton rag paper. I've worked with some of the Stonehenge paper that's also made by Legion. This is the Rives BFK. It's a little bit different, so it's just a kind of a different make, but a very similar type of paper. Again, it's that cotton rag paper. I'll be working with charcoal today, but if you want to work with any material, go ahead. It's been really awesome to see a variety of materials being used for these drawings. So some of you using pen or charcoal or graphite, whatever kind of works for you. So hopefully the things that I talk about as I go through this drawing process will apply to just about any medium. For the charcoals, I've got a stick of vine charcoal I'll be using to lay out the drawing. I'm just going to use the 2B and the 4B today. My 6B pencil just kept breaking. So if you have a 6B and you want to get something that's even darker, go right ahead. I think this will be just fine for me if I go to the 4B. But if you have a 6B, that might be helpful. A couple drawing stumps, but I'm going to use this one here that I've been using a lot for charcoal lately. So this drawing stump, this blending stump can be really helpful. And then a variety of erasers. So I've got my rubber eraser. This is my Derwent retractable one that I love that I actually like to sharpen down to this chisel tip. I also have this Tombow Mono Zero eraser. I'll see if I use it. I like it, but it gives you some nice fine control. And then of course my trusty Kneaded eraser. And then finally, just a paper towel or rag, something to kind of wipe things down. As you know, if you've watched this before, when I work with charcoal, I like to build up the drawing, wipe it down, build it up. Let's get to it. Again, we'll bring this back up. This is the drawing that we're working on. I think I'd like to put a little bit more detail into the drawing I do today. I kind of rushed this one, kind of really focusing on getting the values right. And one of the things I want to talk about today is that, so the thing that kind of stands out in this reference image is that striking light that kind of divides the cheetah. And so I really wanted to capture that. And I think it's important to know that when we get to the details, which can also be rather seductive in this subject, my goal was to try to maintain a focus on the light. And that's what I'm going to try to do today. And then allow the details to be taken to whatever level you want. So like I said, at this point, for this drawing, I feel like I'd like to push it a little bit farther today. That's just kind of the mood I'm in. But you may decide to, take it, kind of block it in and kind of leave it in a more rough state. You may decide to take it even farther than I go with regards to detail. So it's really kind of whatever experience you want to have today. All right, let's get to it. If you are new to drawing, I kind of realized that I've kind of fallen into a rhythm with these drawings where I've kind of skip over some fundamentals. So if you're new and you're just beginning your drawing process, I'm going to try to step back a little bit and talk through some really basic things that I go through in the early stages of a drawing. And if you're new and experienced, like I said, I've seen a lot of you from the very beginning. Hopefully you don't mind as I go over some of the stuff that may be review for you all. So just a note about the chat, feel free to shout out any observations, comments, questions. If you have a question for me, type it out in all caps, and I'm more likely to see it and catch it, because sometimes the chat can get a little bit kind of busy to read from. So, and also a note, sometimes we get people that like to disrupt the chat. So I'm going to do my best to block those today if they come in. I missed a few last time, so usually I kind of see them and I can block them. And it can be a little disruptive. I'm just going to do my best to roll right through it. But there you have it. And if you do have the inclination to be a little bit challenging in the chat, I'd encourage you to not do that, just because it makes it a little bit harder for everybody else who really wants to sit here and draw. So there you go. Let's get to it. I have my reference image up here on my left. So I have a full-size one, and then in front of me I have the overhead projection with the small kind of thumbnail of the reference in front of me. So I have a small version and a big version that I'm utilizing. And so I mentioned that. So again, if you're new, it's really helpful to step back from your work throughout the entire process. So if you're working on a table like I am here, if you can have the ability to stand it up in front of you so that you can step back and look at it vertically, that can be really helpful to evaluate some of those proportions. So the setup that I have here helps me to mimic that, because I can look right up and I can see the projection from the camera overhead, and it's smaller and it's vertical, and it really simulates stepping back probably 15 feet from the image. So Katie's has a question. So when drawing fur, do you score the paper first to make it more realistic? I do not. That sounds really cool though. I've never done that, but it does make sense. I mean, to some degree, this kind of happened in the pen and ink drawing. Was that last week? Where just the tip of the pen naturally embossed the page, and that led to some really cool textures. So that could be an interesting way to do it as well. So if you do that, Katie, I'd love to see that drawing when you're done. So again, it's not something that I've done before intentionally, but I think it could be really awesome. Oh, and then what is the size of the paper? I forgot what I cut it down to, but I have a ruler here. So this is a 9 by 12 paper that I've got. So that's about the size I like to work. Anything smaller, it doesn't show up on camera quite as well. So for me, it's about finding the right size. If it's the bigger the paper, the longer it takes to kind of fill the space, but it's a little bit more forgiving with regards to details and proportions. As you go smaller, if you're off by a little bit, proportionally, it becomes more noticeable. So that's just my thoughts on that. All right. So getting to it, these early marks that I'm making are really gestural marks. So what does that mean? A gesture is really an initial reaction to the form and the way an object fills the space of the paper. So you're reacting without thinking too heavily about what you're doing, but you're responding to the form of the object. And I think the vine charcoal works really well. I'm using an overhand grip, so I'm able to use the side of the pencil more. The filters look, let me see. I'm going to adjust the exposure here, reduce the contrast a little bit. So it was a little blown out there. That's a little bit more accurate. And this initial pass, you can kind of see the tooth of the paper of the Rives BFK. So what am I doing here? This first step, my focus is not on the cheetah itself, it's the shape of the light and dark that I'm looking at. So when we're talking about a gesture, it can sometimes be helpful to try to engage with it as an abstract form and not think too much about what the subject is, because once you do that, it carries with it all of those preconceived notions about how to draw it, what the object is, and it can be difficult to kind of override that. And so a mental trick that I play, and many artists play, is really try to intentionally forget what it is you're looking at. You're just thinking about shapes of light and dark. Now in this case, because I want the light itself to be the primary focus, I'm starting with that right out of the gate. So I'm squinting my eyes. Well, actually, I'm technically not squinting, but I'm blurring my vision. So right now when I look at everything in front of me in the reference image, it's just this kind of soft field. And I'm trying to observe, I'm basically trying to drop a value in for anything that's in shadow and establish the shape for anything that might be in light. So I'm taking this initial pass, getting some initial marks on there, and then as we build up these marks, as we start to lay marks on the page, we can make specific decisions about what needs to change. So we're not making any declarative statements about the cheetah at this point. We're getting something on the page, and then from that we can react to it. And I'm trying to vary up the marks so you can see some of these kind of hatch marks showing up. That's not going to be a major problem, but if it is something for you, just I guess what I'm kind of getting at these early stages is sometimes as the first marks you make can feel really intense because we're starting with that white sheet of paper, and if they are coming on very strong, keep working through it and keep building up layers. So one of the things that I'm also doing with this initial layer of vine charcoal is I call it seasoning. I'm kind of seasoning the paper. I'm getting it ready to accept the compressed charcoal later in the drawing. So it allows some of those subsequent layers to float a little bit more smoothly on the surface. And as many of you know who've been watching me for a while, my general approach to drawing is to try to build everything up at once. And so the concept, the idea behind it is that it's all a matter of refining the gesture. And so we start with these initial marks, and then it's continually refining it and bringing it all up at once rather than finishing one spot, moving on to another, finishing it, moving on, or drawing a line and then filling it in. We're trying to solve the problem of this cheetah on the page and through using the drawing process to figure it out. So to me, it's a lot like putting together a puzzle, and I want the drawing itself to kind of represent and demonstrate and exhibit the struggle that we go through to figure out what this looks like. So there's going to be some marks on here that may stay through the entire drawing, some of these early marks. And sometimes those kind of early, not mistakes, but early decisions and impulses that get adjusted and corrected, sometimes those early marks kind of show through to the end and can be also really exciting. All right, so see a question. Katie, come on. I hope you share your work. It's okay if you don't. I know one of the things we say in this series too is that, sometimes the drawing can be just for you. It doesn't have to be something that you share. And because sometimes we put that pressure on ourselves to do things and we want other people to really respond to it. And that pressure can sometimes be challenging. Adrian is saying, would it help to turn the reference upside down in order to focus on shapes instead of the subject? I think that's a really good tool. It's something that's talked about in that book, Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain, and that's exactly designed to do that. It disconnects you from those preconceived ideas about the form, so it allows you to see it as a shape rather than really immediately recognizing it as a cheetah or something else. I don't necessarily do that a whole lot, but part of that may be just because I've had a bit more practice than some others in really visualizing as a shape. Madbum, let's go. This is what you see under all that detail. Yeah, so right away we could start to I don't know if somebody could look at this and recognize it as a cheetah, but you start to see it as light and shadow as soon as we start to block things in like this. And as you notice, I haven't drawn a line to indicate the edges. I've been using the side of the pencil or the side of the charcoal to block in large masses. And that can be a really quick way to get to that point of recognition of that it's light and shadow and form. We want to try to remove and reduce the amount of lines that we use to represent edges. Hardy Lake. So hopefully the video is showing up for everybody. It looks like some of you might be not seeing it, but we've had some technical issues in the past. So Ramsey Jane says, "Why can't I draw?" I don't know. I don't know as if that's a true statement. I believe everybody can draw to some degree. And hopefully we just do it for fun. All right, so what am I doing now? Now is the next time. I'm kind of talking out loud to myself here, but I think now what I need to do is start to refine the large shapes. I want to block mostly the placement at this point. So I want to make sure that the top of the head fits properly. Okay, what am I doing? I need to find. I want to find where this line is relative to the center of the page, so that line where the shadow line, the line of termination, is. I think it should be just over just a little bit more. So it's just off right to the right of center. I'm going to start to think through the bottom edge and the top to make sure it fits properly. And I'm not sure if the dimensions of the photo match the dimensions of the paper, but I think it might. Oh, I've just seen all Miguel's comments. We could just ignore Miguel. Thank you, though. If Miguel, I'll just block you, dude, if you want to keep going. But I hope that my video is not a statement on my own skill. This isn't about anybody demonstrating that we're awesome artists. We're just here to draw and have fun. So, and it's a lot of fun. All right. So what I'm looking at right now is, again, I'm kind of taking the next step in terms of refining the shape, but I still want to be thinking about that in terms of shape and basic value. And I'm trying to switch back and forth between thinking of the positive space and the negative space. So the positive space is the cheetah. The negative space is the shape around them, and it gets a little bit murky down in this area here, where those values really blend together. So there are three main elements I'm looking at this point. And this is all to really set up for those details, because I'm thinking about that if I get the shape right in terms of the light and shadow, if I get that right, then again it puts me in the driver's seat with regards to detail. I can stop short. I can really dig into that detail if I want. But that's the ultimate hope there. And just remember too that about the ugly duckling stage, we talk about that a lot here, where every drawing tends to go, at least have some moment where you feel like it might all just fall apart, and it goes through what we refer to as that ugly duckling stage, where you're like, oh man, I don't know if this is going to work. But keep going, and I encourage you to keep going through that. I think I do need to erase to some degree to refine this shape. All right, so we're getting I just want to make sure I'm catching the comments here, see if there's any questions. Katie is asking, when drawing animals, how do you give contour to the jaw without it looking like a circle? So that's a really good the jaw shape. That's a really good question. Let me see if I can articulate it because that does bring to mind something that it might help for me actually to kind of describe my evolution in drawing a little bit and why I'm drawing it this way, blocking in these shapes versus drawing lines for those initial shapes, especially around the shape of the head. And there are many drawing resources, and you're going to see tutorials online of these really great artists who will start a drawing by, say, drawing essentially a basic shape. In this case, the shape of the cheetah is almost like a heart shape for the head. So drawing in that shape and then layering on additional lines, linear shapes to find those proportions. What I struggle with when I draw that way is that it remains a two-dimensional object for too long. So as an outline, it's a two-dimensional shape, and I really struggle getting those proportions correct with that. So when I flip it and I think about it in terms of light and shadow first, and then find the forms, I more quickly get to the idea that it's a three-dimensional object on the page, and then I interpret the proportions a little bit more effectively. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about here. And then as you go through it, you'll start to realize what is really necessary in rendering, say, that bottom jaw shape. Because if you look at the subject, we kind of know where that jaw is, but the visual cues in the reference are really subtle. So we're going to sneak up on that rather than define it first and define it perhaps too strongly and then try to soften it. We're starting from a point of things being very soft and then gradually refining in certain areas to indicate things to just to the degree that we need to. Hopefully that makes sense. Because we know the jaw is somewhere down in here, but I can't really see it. There's so much fur. And so I want to kind of maintain a focus on light and shadow first. But like I said, rather than drawing a line, I'm trying to start with those shapes, because when I do start with those lines, I tend to struggle more and with those proportions. I want to start to see this as a three-dimensional object more quickly. All right, so again, trying to react to the form without trying to identify. This is the tricky part where I have to remind myself I'm not drawing an eye. I'm drawing a shape, especially when it comes to eyes. Oh man, I'm going to save the eyes generally for last, because it's kind of like the icing on the cake. And it's like saving my dessert for later. And again, still using the vine charcoal because I want to keep those marks light and loose. And so kind of getting back to that concept of line, sometimes what I'll do is I'll try to visualize the path. So if I'm looking at the shape here along this right side, I'll try to visualize the path I want to go with, run my charcoal on top of the paper over it, just floating lightly over it to visualize it, and then change the direction of my marks. So if I visualize it here, turn my charcoal and create these horizontal marks that stop along that path. if that makes sense. So play around with a variety of marks. And then as we go through, we're going to gradually correct the proportions. So things are going to be off, and they're going to be off right up to the very end. So I'm putting it out there much for myself, because if I trust the proportions too early, and I get to the mode of finishing, I run the risk of kind of settling on those proportions too early. So Clay is talking about notans. I don't know. I know there are some good books about notan. So what a notan is essentially, it's a simplified a design, essentially, of the subject, where you're reducing it down to black and white, and often that correlates to light and shadow, as a way to kind of map the composition perhaps a bit more effectively, and to kind of wrap your head around the strong contrast between light and shadow. And so, I believe, I want to say Richard McKinley has some good information on that, if I remember correctly. But I know there are books out there, but I'm kind of blanking on the ones that would really work for that. But it's not far off from where I'm thinking about for this. It's kind of starting with a notan, but then building it up. So if you think about a notan, it would just, you're making a decision. It's either going to go light or it's going to go dark, and you're make those compositional decisions right out of the gate. And so that kind of is like what I did here, although it's not quite as direct. Okay, so I'm still trying to keep my focus soft when I'm looking, and the way I do that, there's squinting, of course, where you can kind of close your eyes into thin slits, and that reduces the amount of light coming into your eyes, and that's a great way to blur the subject, and you'll see that it adjusts the contrast a little bit more. So if you practice squinting, again, that reduces the details. It kind of makes everything blurry, and it reduces the amount of light. And then try opening your eyes wide, but focusing right in front of you to put the subject out of focus, and see what changes in terms of that contrast. What stands out, what recedes, and that can be helpful. So you'll see that I kind of go back and forth between those two. Everything is out of focus in my vision, so like when I'm looking at the subject, that's essentially what I'm seeing in the reference at this point. But I'm alternating between opening my eyes wide and flooding them with light, and squinting and reducing the amount of light. And I'm drawing more from the thumbnail at this point. I haven't really even looked at the large one on my left here, and it doesn't really matter because I'm not at the point of detail at this point. So I don't need the information that the large one gives me at this point. So, and then I can start to adjust the placement of the eye. So when it gets time to adjusting, now that we have a significant gesture on the page, we're starting to see the form of the cheetah emerge. We can use points of reference within the cheetah to help control those proportions. So especially with regards to the eyes, we have the ears, we have the eyes, we have the nose, mouth, we've got the contour. As we start to place the eye, run what's called a plumb line vertically. And you can do this laying with a pencil on top of the reference image. So you can close one eye, which flattens your depth perception. Align your pencil here with the part of the reference image that you're targeting. So in this case, it's the inner part of the eye. And I'm visualizing a line, a plumb line that runs through the drawing in line with that corner to see where it intersects the top of the head, where it intersects the nose here, how far over is the nose from that line, where does it pass through with regards to that jaw. You can do that with the outer edge as well. So when you're controlling and adjusting the proportions, there are two key processes that I use. There's this, using the plumb lines and horizontal guide. So it's, horizontally, you can do the same thing. So if I run a horizontal line from that corner, how does it going to run through the cheetah? You can use that to help place that second eye. So using plumb lines and horizontal guides, and then what's called comparative measuring. So when you're comparative measuring, what you're doing is you're finding an element in the reference photo, and that's going to be your base unit of measure to compare to other elements within that subject. So in this case, if you want to take the width of the eye, you can compare that width, say, to the distance from the eye to the top of the head, or the distance between the edge of the eye and, say, the nose, or maybe that shadow line, the width of that eye compared to the distance between the two eyes. Compare that to the width of the ear as well. And so if you have your reference image in front of you, you can use a pencil, close one eye, align this end with one edge, so maybe the edge of the eye, slide your finger down so that it aligns with the other edge of the eye, and that gives you a unit of measure. And then you lock your arm, and you carry it on top of the reference image, comparing that to whatever your target is. So now the one thing that you want to be careful with is if you are using something like the eye, you have to be open to adjusting that later on. So if this is not a size that's going to work for your drawing, or if it's in the right place, and if you kind of set that and don't move it, everything is going to be built around that as an anchor. And so you want to make sure that's really placed where you want it to be, right? Or be willing to move it as you go. One final thing that can be really helpful when controlling the proportions is angle sighting. So similar to plumb lines and horizontal guides, try to find the angles of things. So try to find, say, the angle of this edge here. So again, closing one eye, aligning the pencil on top of the reference so that it aligns with this general angle here. Compare that to this side here. And using that angle sighting helps you to kind of find those main forms. You can also use that to help control your proportions by finding the angle between the eye and the nose. In this case, that angle right here is pretty accurate. I'm going to find the angle for that other eye. And so in this way, you end up with essentially a triangle, but you want those angles to be very specific. But that triangle can be helpful to locate and identify the relationship between those three primary features, the two eyes and the nose. Let's see. All right, I just want to see if there's any other questions. Sorry, it's not very exciting for you, RG games. It is what it is. Let's see. Adrian is asking, is cheap newsprint or lower cost drawing paper suitable for charcoal beginners? Yeah, I mean, I think really the quality of the materials, that's an interesting question here. So let me want to think through it before I give a specific answer, because I'm kind of two minds about that. In one case, what I would hate to see is somebody not draw because they don't feel like they have the right materials. You know, there's a lot of times where I might just have newsprint or cheap paper and a number 2 pencil or a stick of charcoal, and I feel like drawing, and it can be helpful just to draw with that. At the same time, I think it's also really helpful to experiment with different materials because they can accept the materials, the drawing materials, more easily. You know, especially with charcoal, newsprint's not going to hold the charcoal as well as like a rag paper or a paper that's specifically designed for charcoal. And so while I think you can draw with it, I think it's also important to note and to put that into context when you're working, because if you're a beginner, sometimes it can be difficult to know what's happening because of you as the artist and what's happening just because of the paper. So I've seen so many students get really frustrated with charcoal when they change to a better paper or a better quality charcoal. Then they realize that actually they're a bit more adept at working with those materials than they were giving themselves credit for. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there. So it can be helpful to start with cheap materials because you can also be more free to make mistakes and just have fun. But also put that into context and know that if the charcoal is not sticking, or if you're struggling, it's just making a mess, that could just be the paper itself. And so maybe try working with both cheap materials and specifically designed paper. All right, so I'm just trying to give myself a little bit more information, and hopefully we're starting to see kind of the character of the subject emerge. And I'm intentionally kind of floating around. My instinct right now is to start really getting into the details. I really want to work on those eyes right now, but I can't. I need to wait because I know that there's a really good chance that I don't have those eyes placed properly, or they're not the right size. And so I need to be open to adjusting those farther. Right now I'm kind of drawing from that overhead projection. I'm looking at the screen, so I'm looking at what you're seeing right now to draw from, because I'm also noticing that because I'm working on this table here, when I'm looking at it this angle, it's really adjusting those proportions. So everything looks wrong when I look at it from here. So it looks a lot better on the screen, and so my instinct is to adjust things when I look here. But if I do, I'm actually going to shoot myself in the foot. So, all right, I think I need to also switch to the compressed charcoal now. So yeah, this fine charcoal, you see how soft it is. So this is part of that process that I talked about early on in the episode here, is to build it up and then wipe it down. What I'm doing is trying to unify everything. So we're constantly working back and forth between making marks that create divisions on the page, and then unifying them and trying to find that right balance. All right, so what do I have here? Here's the 2B. It's a little bit harder, a little bit lighter charcoal than some of the others. soften this edge. Now with this layer of vine charcoal underneath, it's really helping to accept the charcoal a little bit better. If I had gone straight for the compressed charcoal on the bare paper, that compressed charcoal may have stuck a little bit more. But that's one of the things I really like about this Rives BFK paper, is that I just love the way it accepts the charcoal and it releases it. So it's one of the things you want to look for as you're experimenting with different papers, if you're new to charcoal, is what happens when you try to erase it. So I'm kind of working along the outer edge of the Cheetah here. All right, so I just took this angle sight right here from the nose to this part of the ear. And so when I'm working with the compressed charcoal pencils, I'm intentionally using this overhand grip. So, and you can see I used a razor blade to sharpen this, so I'm exposing more of that pencil. And that allows me to lay the pencil relatively flat and build up broad areas of that tone. And then it's constantly sharpening the pencil. So then I don't have to worry about having a sharp edge when I need to add the detail. Is everybody following along? If you are, how's it going? So I want to find that right side of the neck and then compare it to that ear. Greetings from Argentina, welcome. I see seeing a lot of new names here, so I love seeing that. So if anybody else is new, give us a shout out where you're viewing from. And if you are following along, you know, and ask any questions you might have. I wish we had the ability to share work and actually see what's happening. But again, kind of going back to what I was just saying about using that side of the pencil, it also helps me to reduce my reliance on line. So as you can see, I haven't used a line to indicate edges anywhere. So if I see a path, rather than draw a line, I'm building marks up to meet that edge. I have some of these kind of proportion lines that I'll have to erase out. But Heather is saying, hi Scott, wonderful subject, looking good. I think the eyes might be a bit too wide set though. I believe so. It definitely feels that way. Actually, you know what I need to do? I need to kind of step back in terms of those proportions. I'm glad you called that out, Heather. I find that I'm still focusing on the outer edges, but I haven't really paid attention to those proportions and adjusted them. I kind of focused on some of these basic relationships, but I need to look at the distances, that shape of the head as well. So what am I going to do? All right, I'm going to take a measurement from the nose to the top of the head, so right here, and I'm going to compare it to the width. Oh, that's an interesting proportion. Okay, so if I take that, so from the center of the nose to the top of the head is the same distance as the width of the eyes, from the outer edge to outer edge of those eyes. I need the bigger reference image to compare that to. Oh yes, and it's exactly right. So if I take this measurement here and I turn it this way, that gives me, again, the measurement from outer edge to outer edge. And you can see that when I do that, it does bring the eyes in a little bit more. So that's perfect. Let's see. So if I go like this. So essentially now what I'm doing is I'm setting the nose as my anchor. And then I'm going to use that to compare the proportions. So now I've indicated the outer edge to outer edge of the eyes. And then this needs to come over here. I'm just going to blacken in the eye a little bit here. There's that black stripe that runs down the snout that I'll move over a little bit. And so anybody, that was a really good observation there, Heather. So anybody else, again, if you're new, those are observations that I really encourage. You all have helped me to complete these drawings many times, and it's really helpful to have those observations. So don't hold back. If something looks wrong, let me know. I'm not going to take it personally. I'm assuming everything is wrong. And so if you're blocking in the eyes, one of the things that can be helpful is to try to break that symbol system of the eye. We all kind of have developed an idea of the symbol of an eye. You basically make these two kind of curved marks, and that creates an eye, right? And that's really hard to break sometimes because we've been drawing eyes that way for so long. It doesn't matter what eyes, what animal we're drawing, or if we're drawing a person or not. So one way to help do that is to try to break that form down into a sequence of short, straight marks. So in this case, this eye is kind of more vertical on the inside. It's got a slight angle to it. There's a small downward angle here, and then a really strong angle running up this side, and then is more straight over here. So you can kind of see a very specific shape emerging there. And the same with this eye over here. You can kind of break it down into two almost horizontal marks. But try to see that form as a sequence of short straight marks, and you'll end up with something that's a bit more precise. And then as you kind of work that out, as you kind of dig into the details a bit more, you can round that out and make it a more curved oval. All right, so what I'm looking at right now is this distance here. I kind of feel like I had to bring everything down, kind of match that. Give the almost said a leopard, the cheetah, a little bit more, kind of a more precise shape up here, a little bit more headroom up there. It's difficult to see that ear. And I still want to make sure that I maintain an understanding of the shadow shapes. So again, if for those of you who are new, when I refer to a shadow shape, what I'm talking about is the combination of the form shadow, the part of the cheetah that's in shadow, and kind of this cast shadow. So it's part of the form is in shadow, and the background is all in shadow. And I'm trying to merge those together to some degree and make sure that these dark areas are more linked than the light and dark areas of the cheetah, if that makes sense. So if anything, I want the shadow to be more closely aligned with that black space behind than aligned with the light on the cheetah itself. And then if it's too much, if they're too similar, I can always increase that contrast. But I'm kind of sneaking up on the edges of that cheetah within there and trying to focus on that main form. All right, so I think I need to define that nose a bit more. Kind of emphasizing that bottom edge more than the top edge. Looking for the angle of the, when I do this, I'm kind of blocking my view there, so I gotta switch my hands here. And I'm looking for the angles of the mouth there. All right. So doing a quick check-in as I drop this dark line in here, that stripe, kind of doing a quick check-in with the eye and the nose, and the same here. And so you want to be careful not to make two perfectly symmetrical forms. They're relatively symmetrical on the cheetah, but because of the slight turn to the head and the specific form, the shape of the snout, they're not exactly symmetrical optically. All right. All right, JC, I'm glad to hear those comments about the charcoal. I'm glad you like it now. John K, I appreciate the comments. Hello, Brenda from sunny Michigan. Add moments ago, working on the chair drawing. Awesome. Susan is saying the head is slightly turned, so the left cheek is narrower as seen. Yes, that is a good... Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. I'm going to try to keep that running through my mind as I go through, because I'm not quite sure what I need to do to focus on that quite yet. So sometimes the solution doesn't quite present itself, and so you just have to let things sit a little bit. But I'm glad you mentioned that I do need to. I kind of just mentioned that turn of the head, but I need to keep that more in my focus. And I think, what am I doing here? Okay, let me. So if I use a plumb line, what should happen is that the inside corner of the eye should align with the right side of the nostril, of the nose there. And right now they don't. You can see I have that gap. So now, what do I have to do? Let me see. Let me check the distance between the eyes. So this distance here, the width of this eye, if I carry that across, it should put me right at that center of the nose. And then if I take another measurement across, so 1, 2. So this distance here, carry it across, it gets me to that dark line in the center of the snout. Carry this across, and it should be just set in the eye. So I feel like that is kind of more in the middle of the eye. Okay, so here's what I'm working on right now. So what I was doing is taking a comparative measurement, looking at the width of this eye, and then stepping across to see what landmarks I'm crossing over. So what should be happening is that I should take this measurement, carry across. The next measurement should put me right at where that dark line in the center of the snout is. Carry that across further, and it should be about the middle of the eye, which is about what's happening. Carry that across one more, and it puts me to the edge of the cheetah, which might need to come in just a little bit more. So looking at those proportions horizontally across there, it looks pretty good, and might as well take that measurement across here, and that's about right. So then this distance is about right. But as we mentioned, now the nose isn't quite placed properly. So let me take that same base measurement, the width of that eye, and the nose should be a little bit wider than that, which I kind of have. Let's see, does it have to go like that? Move the center of the mouth over a little bit. Soften that a little bit here. I'm not quite sure where the edge of the nose needs to be. And that helps to put that turn in the head, as Susan was mentioning. So thank you, Susan, for that. I think Let me know if that works, if that feels better to you all. That line is actually kind of distracting me, so I'm going to wipe that out. Whoa, Zephy, you're working pen and ink on this one. Nice. Tanmay is asking what pencil am I using this? So this is a General's. This is a number 2 charcoal pencil, but I also have the number 4 that I'll be bringing in for darker marks. Mad Moments Go, 27 years with a tiger painting. The darkness in Sue is saying the darkness in one eye makes him look cross-eyed. Oh, he does. Let me try to smooth that out a little bit. I'm gonna finish those eyes later. Hopefully that works a little bit better. Now, I still need to refine this shape. Let me kind of wipe that down. So I'm just looking at refining the shape of the mouth right now. Now let me see how this stripe might need to change. I don't like that. There's something wrong. And I need to figure out what that is, I think, before I go much farther. Okay, let me check the angle. I'm looking at the angle that connects the bottom edges of the eyes. It's really kind of tricky here. So we're kind of getting in the weeds at this point. But I think this is going to be really important in terms of capturing the likeness. I think that perhaps that's correct. Part of what could be happening is I'm really getting thrown off by this shape. Part of what might be happening is that there's too much contrast there. It's becoming too visible. So I'm going to see if I drop that into shadow a little bit more, if that helps. Soften that edge a little bit. Really start to see it as light and shadow. And then I'm just going to keep going with it. Sometimes I don't know. I don't think I've really resolved at this point, but I don't know if the solution has really presented itself at this point. So what I'm going to do is just kind of work on other parts of the drawing, let my brain kind of chew on that, run that program in the background, and then try to come back to it. All right, so what do I need to do here? So I'm just going to keep bouncing around, continuing to refine this outer edge here. Letting these edges be really soft, because if anything, it just further enhances the volume of the cheetah here. All right, Brenda, thank you for those comments. Okay, Samina is saying take a little bit off the top of the lion's left ear. Yeah, no, I think you're right. I was just coming up to that. I think you're reading my mind there, or I was reading your mind. This shape here needs to be refined a little bit farther. I'm just going to work on this background a little bit. This is a great place to kind of clear the head a little bit, and then it also sharpens the pencil. I can kind of darken that. And if you're doing that, if you're working in that background, one of the things I kind of forgot to do was to roll the charcoal in my fingers as I did that. And that helps to prevent kind of flat spots from emerging on the charcoal. And one of the things I have to kind of remind myself too is I can go darker with this when I get the 4B pencil out. And so as I'm working on this area, I'm letting these two areas merge together, and then I'll come back in with a darker charcoal and define that edge farther. All right. So I think now what do I need to do? All right. And then Sue is saying top of the ear on your right needs to be lower than the ear on the left. Yes, let me see what that specific angle is. So I'm taking an angle sight, connecting the tips of the ears, and that really chops off quite a bit of this ear. And that was a good observation. Thank you for that. Part of what was just happening is that, again, looking at it this angle, it just looked bonkers. That looked like it was going to totally wreck things, but when I look at it overhead, it feels like it's more correct. So thank you. And this ear really falls into shadow quite a bit, so let me drop that down in value. And then this shape needs to be refined. So just looking at back and forth between the positive space and the negative space there to refine that. And now I'm going to start to kind of make more specific declarations of these dark forms, and trying to think about them as abstract shapes, like still, rather than spots, right? I think if my mind says spots, then my instinct is going to be to draw a spot, then another one, and kind of create this pattern across there that could feel really unnatural. I'm also looking at the edges to see where I might be able to unify the form shadow of the cheetah with that background. I don't like that mark there. I need it to go this way. And then lowering that ear changes the shape underneath it, so you need to adjust that accordingly. And then bringing that in helps to change that shape up, and I think help create that turn of the head that was kind of called out earlier. Katie Moore, no! You spilled red oil paint on your white carpet. That is no fun. I would like to say that I've never done anything like that before, but that would be a complete lie. I remember kicking over an entire gallon of gesso, a full gallon of gesso on the carpet, and it was never to be reclaimed. There's no way of cleaning that up. So I'm sorry for that. Hopefully the oil paint came out okay. All right, so I'm going to give some kind of suggestion of some of these spots here. So one of the things that I'm thinking about as I do that is, you know, when I was up here, I ended up drawing a hard line this way, and that kind of worked against me to some degree. If you can, try to visualize the path that you're going to be following along, but again, kind of run your marks in an opposing direction. And in that way, it helps to create marks that feel more natural, and it'll suit the texture a bit more effectively. How are we doing on time? We're about an hour in, so I think we're going to finish up in about an hour and a half to 2 hours total. Pretty consistent with what we normally do here. If you're just joining us, my name's Scott Maier. This is Drawing Together with Artist Network. So we meet every Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern, to draw together. This is the subject that I chose this week. For next week, I'm working on a landscape of a Yosemite National Park. Kind of focusing on atmospheric perspective. Okay. Let me just adding a little bit more of the indication of these spots here. And as you can see, I'm just using this overhand grip, which I spend a majority of the time drawing with. It gives you nice fine lines, but also the opportunity for broad strokes. I've just kind of settled in to that being my default way of holding the pencil. I think what I've done is I've shrunken everything, so I'm looking at the proportions where the cheetah is exiting the paper, and I realize that there's a bit too much space down here, but that's all right. I'd rather have it be a little bit too small than too big, and have things run off the page. And so I haven't focused at all really on working the light side, so I'll be erasing out some of the light along there. I'd rather focus on building darks first, kind of keying everything down in terms of those values, and bringing those lights in later. And in this way, we're starting to suggest the texture now. So the direction of the marks you make can play a big role in how we interpret the texture. And so I want to start to observe the change in texture throughout this entire portrait. So we have shorter hairs around the nose, gets longer towards around the neck and around that outer edge. We get kind of clumps here where we get finer hairs up along those ears. So just trying to make those observations, and then letting the marks kind of flow out of those observations in a very gestural way. But I do want to make sure that I'm really adhering to the light logic here. Everything makes sense in terms of light and shadow. Okay, let's see. Jan Jace, I once stepped on a bright tube of green acrylic paint. Ooh, that's a route, yup. Yeah, spill a gallon of terps. It'll remove the paint, but then you've got all the terp. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I spilled that gallon. I was in art school, and I never did that again. I was a lot more careful with my materials after that. All right. Okay, what do I need to do now? I need to get my head in the game. I do want to adjust the exposure a little bit because everything's looking a little washed out. I know my camera sometimes has a hard time really getting the exposure correct. So I want to adjust things a little bit so it's more accurate, that more accurately reflects the values that I'm seeing on my drawing here. and then Katie's asking, when you do the spots, do you spread the pencil or use the very tip? So I'm going to use the side of the pencil as long as I can. And I'm only going to bring the tip of the pencil into play when I need to. And because I want to be selective with my focus here. And now I think what I want to do is, all right, well, I think now it's time to get to some of those details in here. I feel like I've got the basic form good enough. So I can start to get to those details, and we can be selective with regards to where we apply those details. So if you're so inclined to bring everything up to the same level of finish, you can do that. Or if you want to be more selective and just have a certain area in focus, we can do that as well. And that's one of the advantages to trying to build up the drawing as a whole, rather than finishing one part and then moving to the other, is now I can really be selective. So why don't I know I want the eyes to be in focus, so why don't I focus on that? I think I'll do that. So this is where I'll bring in the blending stump. And I'm not going to blend the entire drawing, because I want to see what happens if I create some division by using it only in the eyes, where it's, we have that smooth texture of the eyes. So I'm going to focus on the eyeballs right now. This is where I'm going to pull out the eraser, just kind of smooth out the eye with the blending stump. And I can see there's light. There's the light coming in from this direction is casting a shadow across the top of the eyeball. And then there's light really catching beautifully in that lower portion. So with this sharpened eraser, I can start to suggest some of that texture, kind of almost doing some negative drawing here. These lines that then suggest the shadow of the eyelashes crossing on top of the eyeball. And we're going to work back and forth. So if I overstate it, if I erase too much, I can always come back in and darken it in some other areas. And there's some nice bright highlights. All right, so I overstated some of them. So I'm going to use this kind of modified grip, this overhand grip, where it's wedged between my fingers. So it still allows me to use the side of the pencil, but I have the control of the tripod grip when you hold it like this, right? But I want to be able to, I want to use the side of the pencil a bit more. And this is where actually I'll bring out the 4B charcoal. Start to really refine that shape. So looking back and forth between the reference image and the drawing here. And so I'm putting a little bit more emphasis on sharpness in that inside edge, and then the outer edge can be a little bit softer, where the fur kind of merges with those darker edges. And when I get to the fur area, I'm using this overhand grip and just these kind of slight vibrations to indicate these kind of softer edges. So when I get to add those details in the eyeball, I'm starting with lighter pressure, and then I'll gradually increase the pressure where I need to darken it. And then sharpen that edge around that little highlight right there in the eye. Doesn't need to be too big. And then look at it I'm looking at essentially stepping back, looking at it from the overhead projection there. And now I feel like this is just too bright. So this is where you can bring in the blending stump and knock that tone down a little bit. So I'm bringing just in some sharp focus here around the eye. And then we'll gradually build up everything else to find that right balance in that. So if we want the eyes to be the focal point, for example, we'll let them remain sharp, and then let other parts of the drawing become soft and more atmospheric. All right. Squinting here, I think what I need to do now is actually just a little bit of light, not just in from the edge of that light part of the eye. And that'll help to create a sense of roundness. And there, I think that works out okay. Your palette just fell, no. Oh, no, I'm sorry, Katie. MB, welcome. I'm glad to see you joining us. All right. All right. Again, if anybody's new, feel free to ask any questions, share your own observations, experiences. Okay, so I feel like that works out okay. I might need to expand this a little bit. I feel like it needs to come in a little bit on the inside. Okay, so as I work on this stripe here, I'm going to kind of tone this. I'm going to pull out the highlights with an eraser. So I want to build up some tone, but I'm going to stick with the darks. And as I work down this stripe, again, just using the side of the pencil, I'm trying to pay attention to the direction of the mark so that it aligns with the general flow of the fur in that area. So as we come here, for example, the fur tends to kind of scoop up underneath the eye into the nose. And as we come down along the snout, then it starts to change direction. And even though it's all very subtle, that those simple observations can suggest detail sufficiently where you don't really have to go in and really labor on those details, if that makes sense. So still focusing on adding the darks, but we're going to get to the point of erasing highlights a little bit later. All right, so now I'm working on the nose. I'm kind of working my way across to the other eye. So I'm kind of focusing on these three primary features. Now, the shape of the nose is really kind of interesting here. So there is some bounce light along that inner nostril. I don't want to over-exaggerate that. So what I'm doing is I'm blocking in a value and then doing some kind of negative drawing up to that edge of that nostril. So then it's dark down on this side of the nostril. There's a light edge, and then it's dark on the outer edge. And then there's also some light striking on there that we'll pull out of the drawing there. And this whole area kind of falls into shadow here, so we have some definition of light along that part of the nose. And so as I look here, I'm also thinking about where the fur emerges from there, and there's a direction to the grain of the fur. So then, and I want these kind of small vibrations of the pencil to align with that direction, and that'll help to suggest the fur properly there. You know, the viewer can really pick up on very subtle indications, and so I'm just kind of relying on that. Just changing the direction of the marks can sometimes be enough to suggest the detail so that I don't have to go in and be too explicit with it. So I'm going to erase the highlights there a little bit later. All right. Let me see. Samin is saying maybe it's just me that feels like the black nose should be slightly smaller and taller. Yeah, it's a good observation. One of the things that gets disrupted here is that light across here. So I need to, let me come back to that. That was a good observation. I want to make sure that I'm getting that right. All right, but I'm going to move up into the eye a little bit here. All right, so I think I'll start this the same way. Now, just right off the bat, this eye is in shadow. So while I see contrast and some highlights in there, the highlights are not nearly as intense as the light across here. So I want to be mindful of that. So I'm going to kind of sneak up on it. So rather than erase out any of those things, I'm going to darken the shadows and then see where that puts me. It's a really interesting shape there. I'm going to simplify that shape a little bit. It's a bit more complex in the reference. Okay. Again, as I work on that lower eyelid, I'm thinking about having a sharper edge inside the eye and a softer edge on that bottom edge where that dark line emerges. And I think this needs to come in a little bit. All right, how's that work? Let's see. I think that works out all right, although I think I can come in with an eraser and pick off some light in there, as long as it doesn't compete with the light on the light side of the head, as long as it doesn't compete with that light. All right. Katie is asking if I could try doing people next week. So next week I'll be working on a landscape, but I do have plans in the coming weeks to work on figures. So I'm going to do a ballet dancer to try to focus on some gestural work. It is time to do another portrait at some point, though. So I'm going to see if I can work a portrait into the upcoming episodes. All right. Where am I at right now? So let me see. I think I'm going to still focus on those, on the primary features here, and I can start to erase out some of the highlights here using this Tombow eraser. starting with a light pressure to see how far it gets me, and then gradually increase as I need to. I think I overstated that, so I can come back in and refine it. So one of the things I like about this this paper is that, especially with a cotton rag paper, when you're erasing, it starts to kind of file away the upper layers, so you can get down to a brighter white a little bit more easily than some other papers. Samin is asking, any new drawings for toned muscle expressions? I don't think I'm able to do that on YouTube, but I think it is great. If you ever have the chance to work from a live model, it can be really the best opportunity to learn about the figure. So, all right, what do I need to do now? Okay. I am going to, I'm going to stay in this side here a little bit. And so as I'm looking at the fur here, again, I'm thinking about kind of two things. The shape of the darker mark and the direction. So thinking about the direction of the fur and then that general shape. And it can be really tricky sometimes. In this case, so for example, there's a darker mark and then lighter fur on top, so I'm kind of pushing into that space to hopefully create a positive negative spatial relationship that pulls the lighter marks on top. And so there's going to be a combination of dragging and pushing to see what works and try to observe what happens with the marks. Does it feel like it's sitting on the surface? Does it feel like it's popping off? We've got the light on this ear, but before I erase the light and run the risk of overstating it, I'm going to finish the darker areas and see what that does to the contrast. As I come up to the edge of the head there, I'm running these kind of vertical marks, letting the pencil just kind of rock on the surface. Started to get a little zigzaggy there, so I got to be careful with that. So as I work that negative space, as I come into it, kind of lifting and pulling into that space. And now I can come in with this to lift the light out of that ear. So again, kind of starting with a softer pressure and then gradually increasing the pressure to lift more if I need it. I'm trying to sneak up on it. And I need to keep evaluating the light structure here to make sure that this stays in shadow. And so far, I think it's doing okay. All right, so as I come down here, I'm just going to indicate some of the light in this section here. So what this is I've got my rubber eraser, and I have it kind of cut. I use a razor blade to cut this into a wedge. And that gives me the ability to create broad marks as well as sharp marks. And so as I come down here where there's this light striking the fur, where do I need to be? Okay, that may not be in the right spot, but I can lift off some of that light there. And I'm just letting the eraser just kind of vibrate on the page, thinking about the direction of that fur. and then playing around with that pressure. So increasing it, lifting it, kind of creating a variety of textures, pressures there to create that texture. There's some light here that I can pull off since I have that. So do a quick check-in. I'm trying to orient myself relative to the ear and to the nose. There's some light right in here. And I find that this rubber eraser lifts a little bit more than this Tombow, so even though this is a bit more fine, I find that I need to really lay in on the pressure with this a bit more. So something to kind of experiment with as you're playing around with different materials is, you know, the erasers can also be, can play a big role in that. So, all right, so since I've got this, I'm gonna go for it. I'm gonna keep lifting off some of the highlights. So I see it's really strong right into here, and then right in here, and on top of the eye. So again, paying attention to the direction of the grain of that fur. I'm gonna sneak up on it with the pressure. And that's not going to get to that bright white of the paper, but that's all right. I can keep everything else down. If it's not quite bright enough, I can just darken everything else around it. And I'm playing around with the angle of the eraser, so tipping it up when I need a sharper edge, laying it down when I can be a little bit more soft, just trying to create some variety there. And then right in here, I need to lift off a bit more. This is really kind of tricky because there's this thin light here, but the direction of the fur kind of runs at a perpendicular angle to that. I can't quite get my eraser in there. And right up here, this upper eyelid. Just kind of sharpening with the eraser. You know, one of the things that I've always kind of struggled with and I still work on is I have a tendency when I see areas that are in light to overstate it. And I'm trying to get more comfortable dropping the value down in areas of the light. So if I look in this light area, there is some nice variety of tones that I want to get, but I also am attracted to that intense light, and so part of me wants to make that light too strong, really intensify it, increase the contrast. So this could be a good spot. I can't remember who mentioned the scoring the paper. That could also be helpful. So especially if you add some kind of embossed texture on the page, that can be a helpful way to suggest detail. And then you get these longer, finer fur, kind of hairs there. Well, right in here, I think get some really nice kind of definition of the fur there. So for me, you know, my approach to texture is to try to let the materials do as much work for me as possible. So if I just focus on value, shape, and direction and flow of the mark, rather than really kind of tighten up and render each individual hair, it in that way the materials start to do some work. And then, paying attention to the direction of the marks also helps to reinforce the structure of the cat here. Romero is saying, "Wow, you picked a challenging one today." It is a very satisfying subject here. It's a bit of a challenge, but it's fun. They each present their own challenges, but this ultimately comes down to edges, I think, a lot for this one here. And letting the edges help to suggest the texture a bit more. I don't think I got the shape of that light quite right, but that's all right. All right, what am I doing? Okay, so I don't want to do the whiskers yet, because I know I'm going to have to work in that space behind it. Let's see. I'm going to switch back to the 2B, so a little bit lighter, and now I'm going to refine some of these marks here. So if I look along this edge, you get the light fur kind of overlapping the dark fur underneath. So as I work those dark areas, I'm thinking about lifting and pulling into that light area. And again, hopefully thinking in terms of the positive and negative spatial relationships. It'll actually hopefully then suggest the light being on top of the dark. And you'll find that, if your goal is to create fine lines, I find that the lines that you create using the side of the pencil are often sharper than when you switch to the tripod grip. Because if you switch this way and you're really engaging the tip, as soon as you make a mark, it's creating something that's wider. You're losing that sharpness. Whereas if you use the side of the pencil, and if you just roll it, you're always engaging with an edge that is very fine. And it's just a matter of creating these soft kind of touches on the paper. So again, let the materials do some of the work for you. Because if you try to think about every hair on this as something that needs to be rendered, it can get really overwhelming. Although I know some of you are really kind of inclined to work in those details, like that mindset, that problem solving. So have at it if that's your inclination. But if not, if you get overwhelmed, like I do, I get kind of claustrophobic when it comes to details sometimes. Then again, try to let the materials do some of the work for you. And so with this overhand grip, you can kind of play around with kind of longer marks, and you roll it up and you start to get shorter marks. And so you can kind of vary the marks that way into something that feels more natural. If you're drawing something and it feels like a spot that's floating on the surface, you may need to lay that pencil down a little bit to create finer, more delicate marks. That dark mark is not in the right spot. Let me see what happens. All right. I do want to create a little bit of definition between these kind of the two tones in that this area that's in light, but it's too washed out at this point. So I need to create a little bit more definition. So this is a really light touch. I'm just letting it just scrape on the surface, trying to be irregular with it because I don't want to create any marks that feel like lines. It'll flatten things out if I do. here we got the dark, there's a kind of a dark patch here. So I'm dragging, placing, dragging, and lifting into that. Again, hopefully to create that negative space that puts the lighter marks on top. So in this way, I'm already feeling better about the quality of the marks. I think it suggests more detail than the preparatory drawing that I had done before. So I'm feeling better about that. So it's really just about being delicate with the touches here. Now, as I work through here, again, I'm trying to think about the layers of that fur. So we have some light furs here where the light is striking it, and then it quickly falls into shadow. So this is where that jawline comes in. We talked about that earlier on. I'm sorry, I can't remember who asked that question about it, but it's looking at the specific shape of the shadow that is going to really suggest the jawline here. So this is really kind of a scooping mark. I want the charcoal to land gently on the page and then lift off to create these fine edges. And then looking back and forth between the drawing and then the thumbnail of the reference, the smaller version, to see if I'm getting that shape right. There's a little dark spot in there so I can kind of lean in on it a little bit more. You get some of these darker spots that are in the shadow. And so I kind of like that right now there's an area here where we lose that edge and then it comes into view and then we're getting more detail as we lead in towards the eye. So I might try to leave that a little bit. So and just define the edges in select areas. Let's see. All right, Deanne saying your drawing's coming together. That's awesome. Liz, I'm happy to hear that yours is looking good. Mad Moments Go, you said you put too much detail in your RAM drawing. Yeah, check those out. Yeah, so anybody can go to the Artist Network site. If you go to the Drawing Together page, you'll see a list of all the different subjects. You click on those, and you can see all the work that people have shared in the comment section. Some really fantastic drawings. And it's really cool to see some of you have posted some paintings or some examples of similar subjects. So as long as it's kind of related to the theme, go ahead and share what you got. It doesn't have to be a drawing. It doesn't have to be in the specific medium that we worked with here. So okay, so as I work across here, I'm going to kind of refine this dark stripe. Have to contort things a little bit to try to get the angles correct to reflect the flow of the fur. I want to be thinking about that as we go along. I love these dark stripes that come out of the corner of the eyes. I kind of minimize that here. So one thing to think about too is that the darks here are in light. So I'm going to be a little bit heavier with the darks in the shadow side. If I'm too heavy with the darks here, we're going to lose that light. It's going to flatten things out. And so as I'm kind of tightening up, I'm still using the side of the pencil, but you can see I've got my finger on it. It's really kind of getting dirty here. But I'm using that to give myself a little bit more control. And I'm continually rolling the the pencil in my fingers here so that again, it's not creating any flat spots. I don't know if anybody happened to watch the Open Studios chat. It was only for members, but I had a chance to talk with Aaron Schur about landscape painting and the artist's mind. Some of the things we think about as artists, we're kind of picking Aaron's brain about how he manages fears and criticisms, things like that can be difficult to navigate as artists. Talk about some of those things here in this series. We've got one coming up with Ron Hicks. He's a great artist here in Denver. That'll be next week. I'm going to be talking about authenticity and ways to find kind of your authentic voice as an artist. That can be so hard. And now for this series, we're kind of focusing on really the practice of it all. So hopefully it's not it's not about creating works that are necessarily going to be framed and hung on walls. It's about just recognizing that there's a benefit to practicing your drawing regularly, giving yourself a challenge, and experimenting with new tools, mark making, things like that, and then seeing how it might apply to work in other media. But it can be challenging sometimes to think about your authentic voice as an artist and what feels right. All right, let's see. Feel like this feels unfinished now, so I can start to add a little bit more detail. And again, I want to be thinking through the change in structure. You get kind of these thicker clumps of fur, and it feels like it's kind of a finer, softer mark. So I want to be thinking about that, thinking about the positive and negative space. And I want to be varying the marks as one of the hard things that I've had to break, one of the harder habits I've had to break, is this desire to create like rhythmic marks in the work. Okay, and I just kind of got lost in my thoughts here, lost in the drawing. And I would just have kind of getting back to that thought. I would just have this tendency to create this pattern of marks that in very few cases actually works. Most things in nature, they have an irregularity to it. And but so I'm trying to knock it in that it can be satisfying sometimes to kind of repeat a mark over and over again. So I have to kind of force myself to break that a little bit. Need to add a little bit more definition to the mouth. Let's see. So I'm trying to visualize that path, but create it as an accumulation of marks that adhere to the flow of that grain, the fur. I don't think I really got that. Something seems wrong, so I'm going to sneak up on it with the eraser. Really light touch, so I don't want to lift off too much. To visualize that path. I do need to lift off a little bit in here, create a little bit more variation in the shadow. to create some more form there. But I still want to make sure that it stays in shadow. So anything that I'm doing in here is really light because I don't want any of those lights to feel like they compete with those highlights. And then seeing down in here, it's more like I'm using the eraser as a smudging tool to move the material around. There's a little bit of strong light just catching the edge of the mouth there. So what happens is this all feels a little too tight, too packed together. All right, so I'm not quite there with regards to the proportions in this section. That feels a little bit better. But we'll get there. That's what it's all about, is working through it. So again, for me, the things that becomes really powerful is evidence in the work of the problem solving that goes into it. Again, we use drawing as a way to better understand the subject, and then as a result, the better we understand the subject, the stronger the drawings are. Sometimes we put so much pressure on ourselves to know how to draw something before we even tackle it. But for me, the real joy in drawing is encountering a subject that you're unfamiliar with, and then the goal is to become familiar with it, to really understand it. And the best way to do that is to draw. And so then the drawing becomes a record of that whole journey you've taken to understand whatever subject it is that you're drawing. So let the drawings kind of reflect that. Let there be mistakes and correction marks, things like that indicate that you might have struggled to get through it. And for me, that was always like really the exciting things when you look at like a Rembrandt or something, and you see sketches and studies that reflect that this artist has really thought hard and kind of fought for the drawing. All right. Sharpen up that edge a little bit. So I mean, it's saying it's so satisfying at the end to see it all to come together. It is. Sometimes it doesn't. I've certainly had those drawings that just fall apart. It's all right. It's not, hopefully you'll do hundreds and thousands of drawings in your life. So if you put the pressure to make each one a hit, it can be unmotivating. All right, so I've got the 4B. I'm going to go back in, and now I'm going to darken up that background and select areas to sharpen things up where I need to. I want to. I'm going to let this side, I think, sit, and then come back in here. So what I'm thinking about first off is along that edge, the flow of that fur, so that any sort of negative drawing just reinforces the flow of the fur. And so right up on that edge, I'm kind of pulling into the edge of the cheetah. And then I can kind of feather it away. And at this point, there may be some areas that aren't quite right. Like I don't think I really got this light here right when I look at the reference photo, but I like it, so I may just leave it. And this is where you as the artist are in control of how accurate you are when it comes to comparing it to the reference photo. Do you want it to be a bit more impressionistic, kind of capture the essence of it, or does it need to be 100% accurate? And that's up to you. Kind of like that ear kind of falls into shadow a little bit on that edge. I do need a little bit more definition here. I want this to be a relatively soft edge, so I'm going to reduce the value contrast a little bit. And then come in here, and I think I just need to add a little bit more contrast in here. But we're coming up on about 2 hours, so I think this is probably good enough for today. I don't know if I can add a whole lot more that's going to show you anything new. So I might just call it a day. And let's see. I see some questions here. Oh, Tammy missed it. I'm sorry that you've got a pet that doesn't seem to be doing well. So yeah, so we run these classes every Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern. So I'm in Colorado, so we start at 1 my time. But they do go up as recordings afterwards. So you can see all past episodes on our YouTube channel or on Artist Network. So hopefully you can see them live. If not, again, they go up as recordings. And all the chat gets preserved as well. So if you're kind of curious what questions people are asking or what comments are being made, you'll be able to see that. Heather is asking, do you ever have several consecutive drawings that just don't seem to work out well? Like a slump where you feel like you can't draw suddenly? Yes. That happens a lot. And I've just kind of learned to ride through that a bit. I didn't handle it so well when I was younger. And I got very frustrated with myself. And it was not helpful in the end. When I was working through my own stuff. But yeah, it's definitely that way. And we kind of talk about that here. The drawing will reflect your inner state, and it'll also affect it. So it'll reflect it and affect it. And I think one of the times in my life that helped me the most is in art school, where when I asked my professor if it was okay to do a semester with just bad drawings. And he said, sure. Because I had put so much pressure on myself to do good drawings. I wanted it to look good when we put it up on the group critique. And I found that I wasn't enjoying it, and I wasn't feeling like my work was growing. So I said, look, is it okay if I do bad work? He said, yeah, that's all right. So I changed up mediums, and I just changed my mindset entirely. I became much more abstract with my thinking. And in the end, after several weeks of doing work that really was not very pretty, I had developed new mark making habits that then eventually translated into better drawing in the end. It just gave me a little bit more confidence. So just erasing out some of the whiskers here, trying not to be too explicit with them, but so I'd encourage you, like, if you are in a slump, try to twist that to your advantage. If you know you're kind of in a rut and you're like, well, this isn't working out, run with it and become intentionally experimental to see what comes out of it. Because maybe there's an opportunity there for then to kind of develop another skill that you can apply when you kind of get out of it. Because we'll have these ups and downs where you'll be perhaps a bit more focused in one area, a bit more scattered in others, and so. But try to turn everything to an advantage as best you can. Is my advice. Try to take that. Once you get that pressure off, sometimes it's the pressure itself. It's like there's this, I've heard that, if you ask like a professional tennis player how they hit the ball, they're gonna mess up because they've done it so many times that they're not really thinking about it anymore. But once they become really conscious of all the little things that they do to become so good at what they do, then there's going to be a period where everything kind of falters. So sometimes we get in our own heads a bit too much, but we're all going to have different ways of getting out of it. And sometimes it's important to be in your head to really ingrain certain habits, to overthink, but it may not create work that you're as happy with. So I don't know if those comments resonated with you at all, but Sylvia, it's your happy place. That's awesome. Glad to hear that. Recommendations on books. I'm trying to think. Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain is a fantastic book. There are a lot of really good books out there, but I'm working on one myself that'll come out in about a year. But I think the best way is to, I think if you can draw from life, that's the best. Can't really do that here, so we're working from a colored photograph. And I say that even if you want to develop your imagination, your imaginary drawing skills, it can be helpful if you're starting out to draw from life because it gives you a point of reference, and you start to develop hand-eye coordination and techniques that you can then apply to things that you might be inventing, and then kind of mix the two. So, but I think that the big thing is to practice with intent to grow in a specific area. And sometimes we put the pressure on ourselves to improve everything. But if you step back and you say, in this one drawing, I want to improve my line quality, or if I want to improve my value relationships, or my proportions, perspective, whatever it is, try to have a hierarchy in your mind about what you're targeting. And so, because every drawing is going to incorporate all of those aspects, but if you can set your intention to develop one, if you can walk away with one developed strength, that's a win for the day. And be aware of what that is, because sometimes we are so aware of where we could improve or where it's not working well that we start to beat ourselves up, and we forget that maybe there are some really good things happening in the drawing that you want to repeat for the next one. And by the same token, sometimes we've had such a good time drawing and we think this is the best drawing I've ever done. You also kind of force yourself to think about what can you do better the next time or differently next time. So you're carrying with you something that can be improved upon, and then something that you're doing well. So that if you have that intention, you're going to more likely kind of ingrain that habit when you're working, so that it becomes more second nature when you're drawing. And so it may feel really clumsy at first if you're having to overthink every little decision you make. But the more you do that, the more you practice with intention, the more it'll become like second nature in the end. So, and then and on that same note, one of the things you might intend to do for your drawing is to not think, to try to get comfortable just being loose and free with your marks. But just know that there may be an effect of that maybe some aspects of the drawing may not work out. Maybe it won't have the correct proportions or the correct values. But that's all right. If you're going into it with the express goal to become more free with your mark making, then really kind of embrace that. So hopefully that makes sense. All right. Greg, you're in one of those slumps. It's awful. I'm sorry to hear it. Yeah, they come and go. I definitely experienced that a lot with painting, and it's a tough one. So I feel bad. I feel bad, but just know it's going to lead to some growth. That's my hope out of all of that. So Um, and I had early on, I had instructors that put it into perspective for me, in that, especially if you're a student, if you're just getting started, if you can do one drawing out of 100, that's a win. That's good. You got to do those 100 drawings. Try to get one, and then out of that, maybe you'll improve that percentage, where it may say, let me try to get 1 out of 50, or 1 out of 10 eventually, and then eventually you get to this habit where it'll be 50-50, right? If it's going to work, and then you'll just gradually increase that percentage. But I've had that here. I have the benefit of having drawn this now twice, and you can see that there's a difference here. They're not identical. I am a little bit happier with this one, and partly because of the feedback that I've gotten from you about the proportions. I feel a little bit better. I feel like I rushed this one, but I also had in my back of my head that this was a preparatory drawing. So I didn't need to necessarily hit this out of the park. But I wanted to kind of use this as an opportunity to wrap my head around the subject. So it could be that these slumps that you're in, they just become preparatory drawings to something that's even better. And so then it starts to become part of the drawing process, is that you may go into it thinking, hey, this could be the final drawing, or it could just be a step along the way. And so if my intention was to create a finished rendering of this, maybe to sell it or something, then this may be only step 2 or 3 out of 5 or 10 before I get there. And try things out. The only thing that I've lost if this isn't the final one is a few hours of my time and some. I spend a lot of time sharpening the pencil, so that's kind of a bummer right there. But so hopefully that helps provide a little bit of perspective. At least that's how I look at it now. JC saying, Greg, you could try another medium than usual. I think that's a really good suggestion. Sometimes that can kind of reset things, is to go in a completely different direction with the intention of saying, I'm doing a mental sweep, coming back to it. I mean, I just know all of you have the skills that you need. You're never going to lose them. If you're in a slump, it doesn't mean that you don't have the skill, that you've lost the skill. If something else is going on. So try just like a reset. You're going to come back. You're not going to go backwards in terms of your skill, unless you want to do that intentionally. So let's see. Virginia, so please let me know how to make this cheetah look exactly the same mood as the photo captured. Virginia, that's a really good question. So I don't know as if I've really captured the mood here. A lot of that comes down to proportions, and this is where like great caricature artists play with proportions intentionally to enhance that mood, to capture that expression. So they'll lock on to the specific proportions, the relationship between the eyes, the nose, and the mouth, to express that. Now, one thing that could be helpful to you is to then essentially trace the image to see where you're at. I know there are some apps that will do that. They'll overlay a photo on top of your drawing, so it'll use your camera, and it'll create a transparency, so you can look through your phone, see the transparent image on top of your drawing, and that might point out some areas where you might be a little bit off. But also think about potentially exaggerating some of these expressions to create that mood. So sometimes doing it 100% accurately and matching the proportions 1-to-1 doesn't quite create that mood. It feels a bit more static. So you might try to intentionally enhance it. So maybe tilt the eyes or create a little bit more movement in the features in order to create that. Hopefully that makes sense. Monica saying you have drawing on the right side of the brain. That is, again, it's been in print since like the 70s. It's a good book. But there's a lot of good drawing textbooks out there. And I think for me, it becomes overwhelming to take it all in at once and then put it to practice. So maybe skim through, see what stands out for you, practice some things, and then move on. And what I've done here in the show is I try to create a drawing from beginning to end so that you can practice a specific skill in the context of a full drawing. Because sometimes doing a simple exercise drawing like a basic box or whatever, it'll develop certain skills, but it doesn't create that sense of satisfaction. And it's really important to feel good about what you're doing because it locks in that information. And so that's one of the reasons why I have an optimistic view of things. So I don't allow like failure necessarily to overtake my thoughts, because I know that anything positive, any sort of growth that I've gone through isn't going to necessarily be retained as much. So try to find whatever is working in your drawing. So even if it's not how you want it, something in there is good. And so you want to be focusing on that, have that good feeling so that it locks that information down for you. Let's see. Greg saying, I think I put too much pressure on myself if a drawing doesn't come out the way I want. I really beat myself up. Yeah, I hear you. Something that we struggle. I think we all struggle with there. So it's easy for me on this side of that conversation to say, oh, be good, like be kind to yourself and don't put too much pressure. And then I know tomorrow I could completely ignore that suggestion for myself. So it's to I'm going to recognize the hypocrisy when I face that myself. Virginia is saying, so do you need to project its silhouette? I mean, its outline for the exact proportion at the beginning. That can be helpful for some. I don't like to do that myself because I want to discover it throughout the whole drawing process. For me, that creates a more lively drawing. If in your kind of process, in your development, you really want to get that, then go for it. Trace a drawing. I mean, an easy way to do that would be to print out the reference photo, put graphite on the back, put it on top of your paper, and then just trace the outline, and that'll transfer the line to your page, and that gives you a boost in terms of those proportions, and that might be helpful to get you there. Like I said, for myself, I like that battle, the struggle to try to get those proportions working out on the page. Sometimes it doesn't work though, so whatever works for you, I think is really helpful. But sometimes we need those tools like tracing or projecting, and sometimes they hold us back. And so being able to recognize where you are in that stage can be really helpful. Oh, Samina's saying like Aaron Blaze does with the digital proportional animal paintings. Yeah, he's a good person to watch as well. There's a lot of really good information online, a lot of really good drawing videos out there. So, all right, I've had you for way too long, and I got to run. I got to get back to work. Not work on this, but other work. So I want to thank you all. This has been an awesome class, a lot of fun. I think the subject was a lot of fun to draw. There are some issues with it that I might continue to refine, but I hope to see all of your drawings. So find that link. I posted at the top of the chat, and it's in the description as well, because I would love to see your drawings when you're done. This has been a blast. Join me next week, where we'll be working on a view of Yosemite. I'm working on that preparatory drawing. I'm gonna get that posted soon, so you can check that out. Subscribe, get notifications, so then you know when the next ones are coming up. So again, thank you so much. I'm gonna hang out for just a few seconds to see if there's any lingering questions because of the delay. Sometimes I miss them. If not, I'll see you all. Have a great weekend. See you next week.